The winter of 1847 descended upon London with a cruelty that spared no one. Snow fell in thick curtains, transforming the grand city into a frozen wasteland where even the Thames began to ice over. In the wealthiest squares, fires blazed in every hearth, but in the narrow alleys of Whitechapel, where the forgotten lived and died in silence, the cold was a predator that claimed lives nightly. It was in one such alley, behind the abandoned warehouses on Milk Street, that she waited to die. Miss Eliza Harrow had not eaten in 3 days. Her thin cloak, once a respectable shade of charcoal wool, now hung in tatters around her shivering frame. Ice clung to the hem of her skirt where it touched the snow-covered cobblestones. Her fingers, bare because she had sold her gloves for bread 2 weeks prior, had turned an alarming shade of blue. She no longer felt the cold. That was the merciful part. Eliza pressed her back against the brick wall, her breath coming in shallow clouds that dissipated almost instantly in the frigid air. Above her, a single gas lamp flickered, its weak light barely penetrating the swirling snow. She could hear the distant sound of carriage wheels, the muffled laughter of people hurrying home to warmth and safety. People who had homes, people who mattered. How long had it been since she had mattered to anyone? 6 months since her father's death. 4 months since the creditors seized their home. 3 months since her last position as a governess ended when the family discovered her father's debts and dismissed her without reference. And now, tonight, in this nameless alley, her story would end as quietly as it had been lived, unremarkable, unmourned, unseen. Her eyelids grew heavy. The trembling that had racked her body for hours began to slow. She knew what this meant. The cold was claiming her at last. There were worse deaths, she supposed. At least the snow was beautiful. At least the end would be silent. Eliza's eyes closed. She did not hear the footsteps approaching through the snow. Nathaniel Ashford, Earl of Thornbridge, had not intended to walk through Whitechapel that night. His carriage had broken a wheel on the icy streets 3 blocks away, forcing him and his driver to seek a blacksmith. While his man went in search of assistance, Nathaniel had decided to walk, restless and unable to simply stand idle in the cold. The Earl was a man of 32 years, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his brow and eyes the color of storm clouds. His reputation in society was that of a recluse, a man who attended only the most necessary functions and spoke rarely even then. Whispers followed him through ballrooms. The solitary Earl, the Ice Lord, a man who had never been seen to smile, never been known to court a lady, never shown the slightest interest in the social machinations that consumed his peers. What they did not know, what he never spoke of, was the reason for his isolation, the scars that marked not his body, but his soul, the betrayal that had taught him the danger of trust. The woman who had sworn to love him and then destroyed everything he held dear. But that was 7 years ago. He had learned his lesson well. Trust no one. Feel nothing. Survive. As he walked through the snow-covered streets, his mind was occupied with estate matters and the upcoming parliamentary session. He barely noticed his surroundings until a flicker of movement caught his eye in a darkened alley. At first he thought it was a discarded bundle of rags. Then he saw the hand, pale and motionless, protruding from beneath a tattered cloak. Nathaniel stopped. Every instinct told him to keep walking. The streets were full of the desperate and dying. One could not save them all. To become involved was to invite complication, obligation, and risk. Yet something held him there, staring at that still form in the snow. He approached slowly, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. As he drew closer, he realized it was a woman. Young, he thought, though it was difficult to tell beneath the grime and ice. Her face was turned slightly toward the lamplight, revealing features that might have been delicate once, before hunger and cold had carved them sharp. She was not breathing. Without conscious thought, Nathaniel knelt in the snow beside her. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. There, faint but present. She was alive. Barely. "Miss," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the silence. "Can you hear me?" No response. Her skin was ice beneath his touch. Nathaniel glanced back toward the street. His driver had not yet returned. The nearest physician would be blocks away, and by the time he summoned help, this woman would be dead. The logical choice was clear. Leave her, alert the parish authorities, continue with his evening. Instead, Nathaniel Ashford, Earl of Thornbridge, did something he had not done in 7 years. He acted from impulse rather than calculation. He removed his greatcoat and wrapped it around the woman's frozen form. Then, with surprising gentleness for a man of his size, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird, her head lolling against his shoulder. As he carried her back toward the main street, her eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Blue, he noticed. The color of winter sky. "Please," she whispered. The word barely audible. "Let me go." "Be silent," Nathaniel commanded, his tone allowing no argument. "Conserve your strength." Her eyes closed again, and he felt rather than heard her sigh of surrender. By the time his driver returned with news that a blacksmith was coming, Nathaniel had already made his decision. "We return to Ashford House immediately," he ordered. "Send someone for Dr. Morrison. Tell him to come at once, and tell no one else." The driver, who had served the Earl for 15 years and knew better than to question him, simply nodded. They made the journey back to Mayfair in tense silence. Nathaniel sat with the unconscious woman cradled against him, his arms never loosening their protective hold. He told himself this was simple humanitarian duty, nothing more. He did not examine why his heart was beating faster than the cold could account for. Ashford House loomed before them, a grand Georgian mansion of white stone and imposing columns. The butler, Hendricks, opened the door with his customary impassive expression, though his eyes widened fractionally at the sight of his master carrying a half-frozen woman. "Prepare the blue guest chamber," Nathaniel ordered, without preamble. "Hot water, clean linens, and fetch Mrs. Pemberton immediately. Tell her we have a patient requiring urgent care." "At once, my lord," Hendricks replied, his training overriding his surprise. Within minutes, the household mobilized with military efficiency. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, a stout woman of 50 with kind eyes and capable hands, took charge of the unconscious girl with practiced authority. "Out," she commanded the Earl, who had carried the woman to the prepared chamber. "I'll tend to her proper. You've done your part, my lord." Nathaniel found himself reluctant to leave, which was absurd. "Dr. Morrison has been sent for," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Spare no expense in her care." Mrs. Pemberton studied him with shrewd eyes. "As you say, my lord, though I'll tell you plain, it's touch and go whether she'll last the night. She's near frozen through." "She will survive," Nathaniel stated, as if his will alone could make it so. "See that she does." He turned and left before Mrs. Pemberton could respond, though he heard her soft murmur behind him. Well, well, 7 years of ice and 1 frozen girl to melt it. In his study, Nathaniel poured himself a brandy with hands that were not quite steady. What had he done? Bringing a strange woman into his home. A woman with no name, no family, no connection to anyone or anything he knew. It was reckless, foolish, entirely unlike him. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw her face again. The blue eyes that had opened for just a moment. The whispered plea to let her go, as if death were preferable to whatever life had offered her. He understood that feeling better than he cared to admit. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, a grey-haired physician whose discretion was as valued as his skill. He spent nearly 2 hours with the patient before emerging, his expression grave. "She'll live," he announced without preamble, "though it was closer than I'd like." Another hour in that cold and there'd have been nothing to be done. Nathaniel, who had been pacing the hallway like a caged animal, stopped abruptly. Her condition: severe malnutrition, frostbite to her fingers and toes, though I believe we can save them all with proper care. Evidence of exhaustion and what appears to be a weeks-long fever recently broken. The doctor paused. "May I ask, my lord, who this young woman is?" "I found her in the street," Nathaniel replied, offering no further explanation. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "I see. Well, she'll require constant care for the next several days, warmth, nourishment in small amounts, and monitoring for fever. Mrs. Pemberton is capable, but you might consider engaging a nurse." "That will not be necessary," Nathaniel said. "The household staff will provide whatever care she requires." After the doctor departed, Nathaniel stood outside the blue guest chamber for a long moment. From within came the soft sounds of Mrs. Pemberton moving about, adjusting blankets, adding coal to the fire. He should retire to his own chambers. There was nothing more to be done tonight. Instead, he quietly opened the door and stepped inside. The woman, whose name he still did not know, lay motionless in the large four-poster bed. In the firelight, with her face cleaned and her dark hair spread across the white pillows, she looked impossibly young. 20 perhaps, 22 at most. Mrs. Pemberton looked up from her task of wringing out a cloth in warm water. "She hasn't woken, my lord, but her breathing is stronger." Nathaniel approached the bed slowly. "Has she said anything? A name?" "Not a word." Mrs. Pemberton applied the warm cloth gently to the woman's hands, working to restore circulation. "Poor thing. Whatever brought her to that alley, it weren't kind." "No," Nathaniel agreed quietly. "It rarely is." He stood there for another moment, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. Then, without understanding why, he reached out and gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. "See that someone sits with her through the night," he ordered, his voice rougher than intended. "I want to be informed immediately if her condition changes." "Of course, my lord." Nathaniel left before he could do anything else inexplicable. But sleep eluded him that night. He sat in his study until dawn, staring into the fire and wondering what madness had possessed him to bring a dying stranger into his carefully ordered world. 3 days passed before the woman woke. Eliza surfaced from darkness slowly, as if swimming up through deep water. Warmth surrounded her, a sensation so foreign she initially thought she must be dreaming. The smell of clean linen, the softness of a real mattress, the weight of thick blankets that held heat rather than letting it seep away. She opened her eyes to find herself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling painted with intricate plasterwork. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, draped in heavy blue velvet. A fire crackled cheerfully in a marble fireplace, large enough to roast an ox. This was not the alley. This was not death. Where was she? Panic seized her throat. Eliza tried to sit up and immediately discovered her body would not obey. Her limbs felt heavy as lead, and pain shot through her fingers and toes at the slightest movement. "Easy now, miss," a kind voice said. A plump woman in a housekeeper's black dress appeared at her bedside, smiling gently. "You've been quite ill. Don't try to move just yet." "Where?" Eliza's voice emerged as a croak, barely recognizable as her own. "Where am I?" "Ashford House, dear. You're safe." The woman held a cup of water to Eliza's lips. Small sips now. That's it. The water was cool and pure, the most wonderful thing Eliza had ever tasted. When she had drunk her fill, she tried again to speak. How did I don't understand. His lordship found you in the snow, Mrs. Pemberton explained, settling back into a chair beside the bed. Near dead you were, frozen through. He brought you here, had the doctor tend to you. That was 3 days ago. 3 days. Eliza's mind struggled to comprehend. His lordship, the Earl of Thornbridge, Lord Ashford. This is his home, an earl. The man who had saved her was an earl. Eliza's stomach twisted with dread. She knew enough of the world to understand that noblemen did not rescue dying women from alleys out of simple charity. There would be a price. There was always a price. I must leave, she said, trying again to rise despite the weakness in her limbs. I cannot stay here. I have no money to pay for. Hush now, Mrs. Pemberton pressed her gently back against the pillows. No one's asking for payment, child. His lordship's orders were quite clear. You're to be cared for until you're well, and that's an end to it. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. She had thought herself too dried out to produce. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would he help me? Mrs. Pemberton's expression softened. That, my dear, is a question perhaps even his lordship couldn't answer. Over the following days, Eliza's strength slowly returned. Mrs. Pemberton and the maids attended to her with gentle efficiency, bringing warm broths that gradually became more substantial meals. A doctor visited twice more, pronouncing himself satisfied with her recovery. But the Earl himself never appeared. Eliza heard his voice sometimes in the hallway beyond her door, deep and commanding, issuing instructions to servants. Once she heard him ask Mrs. Pemberton about the girl's condition in tones that suggested clinical interest rather than personal concern. She told herself she was relieved. Whatever his reasons for saving her, he clearly had no intention of demanding anything in return. Perhaps unlikely as it seemed, he truly was simply a nobleman with an unexpected charitable impulse. On the 7th day, Mrs. Pemberton arrived with a bundle of clothing. His lordship thought you might like proper dress, she said, laying out a simple but well-made gown of grey wool, along with fresh undergarments and stockings. These belong to a cousin, I'm told. Should fit you well enough. Eliza touched the fabric with trembling fingers. It had been so long since she had worn anything clean and whole. I don't know what to say. Say thank you when you see him, Mrs. Pemberton replied. He's asked that you join him for tea this afternoon. If you're feeling strong enough. Fear and curiosity warred in Eliza's chest. He wishes to see me. In the library at 4 o'clock. Don't look so frightened, child. His lordship may be stern, but he's not cruel. That afternoon, dressed in the borrowed gown with her dark hair arranged simply by one of the maids, Eliza made her way downstairs for the first time. Ashford House was even grander than she had imagined, all marble floors and gilt mirrors and paintings in heavy frames. She found the library easily enough. The door stood open, revealing a vast room lined floor to ceiling with books. A fire burned in the hearth, and before it stood a man. He had his back to her, one hand braced against the mantelpiece as he stared into the flames. Even in silhouette, he was imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, with an air of command that radiated from him like heat. Eliza cleared her throat softly. My lord? He turned, and she got her first clear look at the man who had saved her life. His face was all hard planes and sharp angles, handsome in a severe way that suggested neither warmth nor softness. Dark hair touched with grey at the temples, eyes the colour of winter storms that assessed her with uncomfortable intensity. He was dressed impeccably in black save for a white cravat, his clothing speaking of wealth and taste. This was not a man who smiled. This was not a man who felt. Yet he had saved her. "Miss Harrow," he said, his voice as cool and measured as his expression, "I am pleased to see you recovered." Eliza's eyes widened. "You know my name. Your father was Christopher Harrow, a merchant who died 6 months ago, leaving substantial debts." It was a statement, not a question. "You were employed briefly as a governess to the Aston family until they discovered your circumstances and dismissed you. You have no family, no resources, and nowhere to go." Horror flooded through her. He had investigated her, had servants spy on her perhaps, gathering information while she lay unconscious. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know who I bring into my home," Nathaniel said, his tone flat. "You may be assured I uncovered nothing scandalous. You are, by all accounts, precisely what you appear. A gentlewoman fallen on unfortunate times through no fault of her own." Eliza's hands clenched in the folds of her skirt. "If you have determined I pose no threat, then I shall trouble you no further. I am grateful for your assistance and will leave your house at once." "To go where?" he asked, one eyebrow rising slightly. "Back to that alley? Shall I return you there so you may finish dying in the snow?" The words were harsh, but something in his tone was not quite as cold as his expression suggested. Eliza lifted her chin, refusing to show how his words cut. "That is my concern, not yours, my lord." "Sit down, Miss Harrow." It was a command, not a request. After a moment's hesitation, Eliza moved to one of the chairs near the fire. The Earl remained standing, as if proximity to her might somehow contaminate him. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his hands clasped behind his back. "One that will benefit us both." There it was. The price she had known must exist. Eliza's stomach churned, but she kept her voice steady. "What manner of proposition?" "I require a librarian," Nathaniel stated. "Someone to catalogue and organize my collection. It is extensive and has been neglected. The task would take months, perhaps a year." Eliza stared at him, certain she had misheard. "A librarian? You read and write, I presume? You were educated as a gentlewoman." "Yes, but—" "The position includes room and board in the servants' quarters, along with a small stipend." He named a sum that was modest but fair. "In exchange you will organize the library, manage my correspondence, and perform such other clerical duties as I may require. Nothing more." "Nothing more." The words hung in the air between them. Eliza searched his face for any hint of deception, any suggestion that this offer came with unspoken expectations. She found only that same cool assessment. "Why," she asked finally, "you could hire anyone. Why me?" For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not quite warmth, but perhaps a flicker of recognition. "Because you understand what it is to be invisible," he said quietly. "To be seen as nothing, to exist at the margins of a world that cares nothing for your suffering." The words struck her like a physical blow. How could this Earl, this powerful man in his grand house, possibly understand such things? Unless he, too, carried wounds that did not show. "I accept," Eliza heard herself say, before she could reconsider. "Though I must tell you, my lord, I have no references, no family to vouch for my character. If you have investigated me, you know I am nothing, nobody." Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Everyone is somebody, Miss Harrow. They simply require the proper circumstances to discover who." He moved to the door, then paused. "You will begin tomorrow. Mrs. Pemberton will show you to your quarters and explain the household routine. I expect punctuality and competence." In return, you will have security and purpose. My lord, Eliza called as he was leaving. When he turned back, she met his gaze with all the dignity she could summon. Thank you for my life, for this chance. I will not fail you. Something flickered in those storm-grey eyes. Not quite a smile, but perhaps the ghost of one. See that you don't, Miss Harrow. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the library that would become her domain. Eliza sank back into the chair, her heart pounding. She had expected cruelty, exploitation, or dismissal. Instead, she had been offered what she had thought lost forever: purpose, safety, a reason to wake in the morning. She did not deceive herself. The Earl was not kind. He was cold, distant, and clearly wanted nothing to do with her beyond her usefulness. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. So why, when she closed her eyes, could she still feel the ghost of his touch? The moment he had brushed that strand of hair from her face while she lay unconscious, unaware that she had woken just enough to feel it. Why, when he spoke of understanding invisibility, had his voice carried such pain? Eliza opened her eyes and looked around the vast library. Thousands of books surrounded her, each one containing stories of other people's lives. Tomorrow she would begin organizing them, bringing order to chaos. Perhaps, in the process, she might understand the mystery of the man who had saved her. The Ice Earl who claimed to feel nothing, yet whose hands had been gentle when he carried her broken body through the snow. The winter wind howled outside the windows, but inside Ashford House, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza Harrow felt warm. Her new life had begun. The weeks that followed established a pattern that was both comfortable and strange. Eliza woke each morning in a small but clean room, in the servants' wing, dressed in the simple grey gowns that had become her uniform, and descended to the library before the Earl had finished his breakfast. The task before her was enormous. The library contained thousands of volumes, accumulated over generations, with no apparent system of organization. Books on philosophy sat beside Gothic novels. Scientific treatises mingled with poetry. Ancient texts in Latin shared shelves with modern newspapers. Eliza threw herself into the work with quiet determination. She began by creating detailed lists, categorizing each volume by subject, author, and publication date. The familiar rhythm of intellectual labor soothed something in her that had been raw since her father's death. But always, she was aware of him. The Earl moved through his house like a shadow, silent and solitary. He took breakfast alone in his study. He rode out each morning at precisely 8 o'clock, returning hours later with his greatcoat dusted with snow. He received few visitors and attended fewer social engagements. He spoke to Eliza perhaps once a week, and then only to inquire about her progress or issue brief instructions. His manner was always formal, his tone neutral. He never asked how she was faring, never showed the slightest personal interest. Yet she felt his presence constantly. Sometimes, late in the evening after the household had retired, she would hear his footsteps in the corridor outside the library. He would pause by the door, just for a moment, as if listening to hear whether she was still working. Then the footsteps would continue, fading into the darkness. Once, she found a book left on the table where she worked. A volume of poetry by Wordsworth, open to a specific page. The poem spoke of loneliness and longing, of souls that recognized each other across impossible distances. She never mentioned finding it. He never asked. Mrs. Pemberton watched the strange dance between them with knowing eyes. His lordship was not always so cold, she confided one afternoon, bringing Eliza tea in the library. There was a time 7 years ago when he was different. Warmer, he smiled then, even laughed on occasion. Eliza looked up from her cataloguing. What happened? The housekeeper's expression grew troubled. A woman, Miss Catherine Winters, daughter of a baron. She was beautiful, charming, everything a man could want. His lordship courted her for a full season, against his father's wishes. The old earl wanted him to marry for advantage, not affection. But he loved her, Eliza said softly. I loved her with everything he had. Mrs. Pemberton shook her head sadly. He proposed, she accepted. The engagement was announced. His lordship was transformed, so full of plans and hope. What went wrong? She was a liar and a thief, Mrs. Pemberton said bluntly, used his love to gain access to the family jewels, then disappeared the night before the wedding with nearly £20,000 worth of heirlooms, ran off with a German count, they said, left his lordship standing at the altar before a church full of guests. Eliza's breath caught. How horrible! The humiliation broke something in him. He withdrew from society entirely, refused to speak of it, became the Ice Earl you see now. The housekeeper paused. Until you... Me? Eliza shook her head quickly. I am merely his employee. He barely acknowledges my existence. Perhaps, Mrs. Pemberton replied, though her eyes suggested she believed otherwise. Or perhaps you remind him that not everyone in this world is cruel, that some people are worth saving. After she left, Eliza sat for a long time, staring unseeing at the books before her. She understood now, understood the walls he had built, the ice he wrapped around his heart. He had trusted once and been destroyed for it. She knew that pain. Her father's death had taught her that love and loss were inseparable, that to care was to risk devastation. No wonder the Earl kept himself apart. No wonder he treated her with such careful distance. Yet the book of poetry remained on the table, and his footsteps still paused outside her door each night. Winter deepened its hold on London. The Thames froze solid enough for frost fairs. Snow fell almost daily, transforming the city into a landscape of white and grey. But inside Ashford House the fires burned bright, and slowly, imperceptibly, something began to thaw. It started with words. The Earl began pausing in the library more frequently, asking questions about her progress that gradually evolved into conversations about the books themselves. He would mention a particular volume, and she would share her thoughts on it. He would recommend an author, and she would respond with her own suggestions. Their discussions were always formal, always proper. But beneath the surface courtesy, Eliza sensed a hunger in him that matched her own. A hunger for connection, for intellectual companionship, for someone who saw him as more than a title or a fortune. One snowy afternoon, she found him standing before the poetry section, a slim volume in his hands. He looked up as she approached, and for just a moment his guard was down. She saw weariness in his eyes, and something else, loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. "Miss Harrow," he acknowledged, closing the book quickly. "I did not mean to disturb your work." "You're not disturbing me, my lord." Eliza moved closer, drawn by an impulse she did not examine. "Is that Byron?" "Wordsworth." He held up the volume. "I find his work speaks to—" He stopped, as if catching himself before revealing too much. "To those who understand solitude," Eliza finished gently. His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, the distance between them felt less vast. "Yes," he said quietly. "Precisely. I have often thought," Eliza continued, emboldened by the momentary connection, "that Wordsworth understood something most poets miss, that loneliness is not the same as being alone. One can be lonely in a crowded ballroom and find peace in solitary contemplation. And which do you prefer, Miss Harrow?" The question was carefully casual, but his gaze was intent. "Crowds or solitude? I have had little choice in the matter, my lord," Circumstances have made solitude my companion, whether I wished it or not. She paused, but I find that books provide society enough. They ask nothing, judge nothing, and offer wisdom without cruelty. Unlike people, she agreed softly. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "You are not what I expected, Miss Harrow." "What did you expect, my lord?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But not this. Not someone who understands." Before she could respond, he replaced the book on the shelf and left the library, his footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. Eliza stood motionless, her heart beating too quickly. Something had shifted. Some barrier had cracked, just a little. That evening, for the first time since her arrival, the Earl did not dine alone. A footman appeared in the library as Eliza was preparing to return to her quarters, bearing a message. "His lordship requests your presence at dinner, miss." Eliza's pulse quickened. "Me? Surely there's some mistake." "No mistake, miss. 8 o'clock in the small dining room." His lordship was quite specific. She had nothing suitable to wear. The grey wool gowns, while serviceable, were not meant for dining with an earl. But she had no choice. At precisely 8 o'clock, she presented herself at the small dining room, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirts. Nathaniel stood as she entered, a gesture of courtesy that surprised her. He had changed for dinner, his formal black evening clothes making him seem even more imposing. But his expression, while still reserved, held something new. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps curiosity. "Miss Harrow, please sit." The meal was served in near silence at first. The only sounds the gentle clink of silver on china and the crackling of the fire. Eliza barely tasted the food, too aware of the man across from her, too conscious of every movement, every glance. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "I wished to discuss your progress with the library." "Of course." This was business, nothing more. Eliza kept her voice steady. "I have completed the inventory of the first 3 sections, my lord. The philosophical works and classical texts are now properly organized. I estimate another 4 months for the remaining collections." "You work efficiently." He paused. "And without complaint. That is rare." "I am grateful for the work, my lord, and for everything you have done for me." His jaw tightened. "Gratitude is unnecessary. This is a fair exchange of services." But it wasn't, and they both knew it. He had saved her life, given her shelter and purpose when she had nothing. No amount of cataloguing books could repay that debt. "Nevertheless," Eliza said softly, "I am grateful." Nathaniel's gaze met hers across the table, and for a moment the careful distance between them seemed to dissolve. "Tell me," he said abruptly, "if you could have anything in this world, Miss Harrow, what would you choose?" The question caught her off guard. She considered lying, offering some safe and proper response, but something in his expression made her tell the truth instead. "I would choose to matter," she said quietly, "to be seen, to know that my existence made some small difference in the world, even if only to one person." Nathaniel's hands stilled on his wineglass. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He could not quite suppress. "You matter, Miss Harrow, more than you know." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither dared acknowledge. Eliza felt her breath catch, felt something shift and settle in her chest like a key turning in a lock. "My lord," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Forgive me, that was inappropriate. I should not have." "Please." Eliza rose as well, driven by instinct. "Don't apologize. She faltered, unsure how to continue. I understand loneliness, my lord. I understand what it is to be invisible, and I see you. Despite everything you do to hide yourself, I see you." Nathaniel went very still. "You should not," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Seeing me is dangerous." "Why?" He turned away, but not before she caught a glimpse of something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "Because everyone I have allowed close has either betrayed me or been destroyed. I will not risk that again." Eliza moved closer, drawn by a force she could not resist. "Then don't allow me close, my lord, but do not shut me out entirely. Loneliness shared is lonelier than solitude embraced." He faced her again, and in his eyes she saw a battle being waged. Control against desire, safety against risk. The walls he had built against the yearning to let them fall. "This cannot be," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "You are my employee. I am your master. There are boundaries that must not be crossed." "Of course, my lord," Eliza replied, stepping back though it cost her. "I apologize if I have overstepped." "You have not," Nathaniel said quickly. "Too quickly. That is the difficulty." They stood there, neither moving, neither speaking, the space between them charged with everything they could not say. Finally, Nathaniel broke the silence. "You should retire, Miss Harrow. It grows late." "Yes, my lord, thank you for dinner." She left before the tears could fall, before she could do something foolish like reach for him, like beg him to see that they could be more than master and servant, more than two lonely souls passing each other in elegant corridors. But as she reached the doorway, his voice stopped her. Eliza, her name. Not Miss Harrow, but her given name, spoken in a tone that held everything he would not admit. She turned slowly. Nathaniel stood, bathed in firelight, his face shadowed but his eyes bright with emotion. He could no longer hide. "You matter to me," he said simply. "That is the truth I can no longer deny." Then he turned away, leaving her standing in the doorway, with her heart beating wild and fast, understanding at last what was happening between them. Something neither had intended, something both had tried to resist, something that might destroy them both or save them. The snow continued to fall outside the windows of Ashford House, but inside, the ice had finally begun to crack. The final section is coming in the next part. Stay with me as this story reaches its powerful conclusion. The days following that dinner were torture of the most exquisite kind. Nathaniel avoided the library entirely, conducting his business from his study and leaving instructions for Eliza through Mrs. Pemberton. She told herself this was for the best, that distance was wisdom, that whatever spark had ignited between them must be extinguished before it consumed them both. But she could not stop thinking of the way he had said her name, the raw honesty in his eyes when he admitted she mattered to him. A week passed, then another. The library was nearly complete. Soon her work would be finished, and there would be no reason for her to remain at Ashford House. The thought filled Eliza with a desperation she had no right to feel. On the 14th night after their dinner, unable to sleep, she descended to the library. It was well past midnight, the household deep in slumber. She lit a single candle and stood among the now ordered shelves, running her fingers along the spines of books she had come to know intimately. Couldn't sleep. Eliza spun around to find Nathaniel standing in the doorway. He wore only his shirt sleeves, his cravat loosened, his dark hair disheveled as if he too had been tossing restlessly. "My lord, I didn't mean to disturb." "You didn't." He entered the room slowly, like a man approaching a cliff edge. "I saw the light, thought perhaps someone had left a candle burning." "I should go," Eliza said, though her feet remained rooted to the floor. "Stay." The word was not a command, but a plea. "Please." They stood there in the candlelit darkness, the silence between them alive with everything they had not said. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "I have been avoiding you. I know. Not because I wish to," he continued, moving closer, "but because when I am near you I forget every lesson I learned. I forget to protect myself. I forget to be cold." Eliza's heart was beating so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Is that so terrible?" "It is dangerous," he corrected. "For both of us. Because you were betrayed," she said softly. "Because Catherine Winters broke your heart and stole from you and made you believe that trust was impossible." His expression hardened. "You have been listening to servants' gossip. Mrs. Pemberton told me." Eliza admitted. "She wanted me to understand why you are as you are." "And do you understand?" "Yes," she said simply. "I understand that you built walls to protect yourself from further pain. I understand that you chose ice over warmth because warmth could burn you. I understand everything, Nathaniel, except one thing." He flinched at her use of his given name, but did not correct her. "What? Why did you save me?" The question emerged as a whisper. "That night in the snow, you could have walked past. You could have sent for the parish authorities. Instead, you carried me to safety. You brought me into your home. You gave me purpose when I had none. Why?" Nathaniel closed his eyes as if the answer pained him. When he opened them again, the carefully maintained distance was gone. In its place was raw, undeniable truth. "Because when I saw you lying there," he said, his voice rough, "I saw myself, not the Earl of Thornbridge with his fortune and title, but the man beneath, the one who knows what it is to be broken, to be dying inside, while the world walks past unseeing." He moved closer still, until only inches separated them. "I saved you because in that moment, saving you felt like saving myself." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "Nathaniel, I told myself it was charity," he continued, the words spilling out as if a dam had broken, "that I would employ you and keep my distance and feel nothing. But you are right. I see you, Eliza. I see your strength and your grace and the way you refuse to be broken despite everything life has taken from you. And when I look at you, I remember what it felt like to feel, to hope, to believe that not everyone in this world is cruel." "We are both broken," Eliza whispered, closing the remaining distance between them. "But perhaps broken things can fit together in ways whole things never could." "This is madness," Nathaniel said, even as his hand rose to cup her face with infinite tenderness. "I am an earl. You are nobody," Eliza finished. "I know. Society would call this scandalous, improper, impossible." "Yes," he agreed. "All of those things." His thumb traced her cheekbone gently. "But I find I no longer care what society thinks. For 7 years I have been dead inside. Eliza, until you..." She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "Then let us be improper together," she said softly. "Let us be scandalous. Let us be alive." For a moment more he hesitated, the last vestiges of his iron control warring with the truth of his heart. Then, with a sound that was half laugh and half sob, Nathaniel Ashford surrendered. He kissed her with the fervour of a man who had forgotten what warmth felt like, who had believed himself incapable of tenderness. Eliza responded with equal intensity, her arms wrapping around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperation and longing and the shattering of 7 years of ice. It was 2 drowning souls finding shore at last. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I cannot offer you what society demands," he said quietly. "I cannot give you the wedding you deserve, the grand celebration, the approval of the tone. "I don't want any of that," Eliza replied. "I only want you. However, you'll have me." "Then you shall have all of me," he promised. "My heart, my name, my future. Everything I am and everything I possess. If you will accept a man who has forgotten how to be anything but cold." "Then I will teach you warmth," Eliza said, smiling through her tears. "And you will teach me that I am worth more than the world told me I was." He kissed her again, softer this time, and in that kiss was a vow more binding than any spoken before witnesses. The snow had stopped falling. Outside the library windows, dawn was breaking over London, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. And inside Ashford House, two broken souls discovered that sometimes salvation comes not from being saved, but from finding someone worth saving ourselves for. 3 months later, a small notice appeared in the London papers. The Earl of Thornbridge had married Miss Eliza Harrow in a private ceremony attended only by immediate household staff. Society gasped and whispered and speculated about the unsuitable match. But in the grand library of Ashford House, where thousands of properly organized books now stood in perfect order, the Earl and his new Countess cared nothing for gossip. They had each other, and that was enough. That was everything. And when spring came at last, melting the last of winter's ice, they planted roses in the garden. White ones for new beginnings, red ones for love that survives against impossible odds. The forgotten spinster and the Ice Earl, who both learned the same truth, that the greatest stories are not found in books, but in the courage to risk one's heart again after it has been broken. That sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in the coldest soil. And that nobody is nobody. Everyone matters. They need only find the one person brave enough to see them. If this story touched your heart, imagine the hidden chapters waiting for you. As a cherished member of our Victorian Love Story Circle, you'll unlock exclusive tales, behind-the-scenes content, and special access to stories that never leave the archive. Join our community of passionate readers and let the manor doors open wider for you. What moved you most in Eliza and Nathaniel's journey? Was it the moment he carried her through the snow, the poetry he left for her, or perhaps that powerful instant when he finally spoke her name? Share your thoughts in the comments and connect with fellow readers who believe in love that redeems. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for spending this time with us in the world of Victorian romance. Your support helps us continue bringing stories of courage, redemption, and the kind of love that transforms even the coldest heart. Another equally moving tale awaits you on your screen. Don't miss it. Continue the journey with us. Subscribe now so you never miss a story of hope found in impossible places.